Hi, folks. Lou here, and I'm going to talk about climate and its effects on history, sort of as a follow-up to my recent video about weather and its effects on warfare. Now, this, of course, is very long-term. We're talking about decades and even centuries. And so this won't show up in games much unless you have some kind of rise of civilizations and empires game where the time scale is in many hundreds of years. But even then, you don't necessarily have to incorporate this. For example, Britannia has no weather effects, and it covers 1,000 years of British history. And there were certainly times when it was cooler and when it was warmer and so on, but I just decided it wasn't necessary to put that into that game. Now, in other situations, maybe it is necessary. Typically, it's droughts that do away with civilizations and empires. For example, Sargon's empire of Akkad may have fallen ultimately because of a very, very long term, as in centuries, drought. Although, of course, it's hard to say because we don't have much information about that time. The Harappan Empire, which was in the Indus, was now Pakistan mostly, disappeared, and we don't know why, but we think climate change ultimately caused a river to change where it flowed, and the civilization just could not handle the lack of water. The Anasazi civilization in southwestern America, southwestern United States, I suppose I should say, suffered severely from droughts, exacerbated by how they dealt with their flora and fauna. To come to a more recent time, Australia was settled when the climate was atypically wet. And now it's going back to more typical dryness, and this is causing a great deal of trouble for Australian agriculture, rivers drying up so there's nothing left when it gets to the sea, and so on. Take another example, we have the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya rivers, which in ancient times were called the Oxus and the Jaxartes. The Amu Darya is one of the longest rivers of Central Asia, or at least it was. They flow westwardly from mountains into the Aral Sea. And they were important in ancient history. We had civilizations there. We had the great cities of Bukhara and Samarkand and so forth. Now, Peter Zion tells me that the rivers are fed by summer melt of glaciers in the mountains. And those glaciers, as with many glaciers in a world of global warming, have just about melted away, which will dry up the rivers. And that will further stress the Aral Sea, which is already much, much smaller than it used to be, as well as making it very hard for agriculture in that area. And I've discovered that the Amu no longer reaches the Aral Sea even now. So these are pretty drastic effects, but modeling those effects in a game would be exceptional. Again, games of empires, rise of empires and rise of civilizations and their fall. And I think in those situations, rather than possibly having a die roll as to what happens, you might just go along with whatever did happen and have that take effect on the games. It's kind of like how do you deal with plagues? One way is to roll to see if a plague happens. Another is to just say, well, there's a big plague at this time, the Justinianic plague, for example, and that has these effects on what's happening and what the player sides are capable of in that turn. I know I've made some game that is a derivative of Britannia, where in one particular round, none of the nations has any increase of population because of plague. Thanks for listening.